They sold me to a monster for 3 bags of gold. To escape his cruel mating ceremony, I ran into the deadly forbidden woods, expecting to die. Instead, I crashed straight into the chest of the Alpha King. He didn't see a broken, curvy runaway. He saw his fated mate. And as my hunters closed in, he just smiled and said, "What the king finds, the king keeps." Welcome to Luna's Secret Library. On this channel, you can enjoy all sorts of romantic love stories. If you like my stories, please subscribe to my channel for more wonderful tales. The heavy scent of incense filled the great hall. Elena felt the cold stones beneath her bare feet. Every woman in the pack stood in a line, waiting for their fate. Tonight was the mating ceremony. For Elena, it was a death sentence. She looked at the man standing at the altar. Baron was twice her age and had eyes like a predator. He smiled at her, his teeth yellow and sharp. "You belong to me now, Elena," Baron whispered. The crowd cheered, but Elena felt a chill down her spine. She was the most beautiful girl in the village. Her beauty had become her curse. Her father had sold her to Baron for 3 bags of gold and a piece of land. The elder stepped forward with the ritual dagger. "By the blood of the moon, let the bonds be sealed," the elder chanted. Baron reached for her arm, his grip like iron. Elena saw her reflection in the dagger's blade. She saw a girl who was about to lose her soul. "No," she told herself. "Not today." The wind suddenly roared outside, rattling the heavy oak doors. A torch fell, setting the silk curtains on fire. The hall erupted into chaos. "Grab her!" Baron shouted as the smoke began to rise. This was her only chance. Elena didn't think, she just ran. She tore the lace from her white gown to free her legs. She pushed through the panicked guests and dove out a side window. The night air was freezing, but she didn't care. She sprinted toward the forbidden woods. No one dared to enter those woods after dark. They said the Alpha King hunted there. Behind her, she heard the howls of Baron's men. "Find her. Bring her back alive." Baron's voice echoed through the trees. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her lungs burned with every breath. The forest was a maze of thorns and shadows. The branches clawed at her skin, drawing blood. She tripped over a root and tumbled down a small slope. She scrambled back to her feet, her white dress now stained with mud. She could smell the wolves behind her. The scent of wet fur and aggression was closing in. Suddenly, the forest went silent. The birds stopped chirping. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Elena stopped, her chest heaving. The silence was heavier than the noise. She turned around, looking for a place to hide. She saw a massive oak tree with thick roots. But as she turned, she slammed into something hard. It wasn't a tree. It was a chest, solid as a mountain. Elena gasped and looked up. A man stood before her, taller than any wolf she had ever seen. He wore a long black coat that blended into the night. His hair was short and dark, his jawline sharp enough to cut. But it was his eyes that froze her. They were a piercing, molten gold. "Where are you going in such a hurry, little wolf?" the man asked. His voice was a deep rumble that vibrated in her chest. Elena tried to step back, but her legs gave out. He caught her by the waist before she could hit the ground. His hand was warm, and his touch sent a jolt through her body. It wasn't fear. It was something else. Something ancient. "Please," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "Hide me." The man looked past her, toward the sound of the approaching guards. His expression didn't change. He looked bored, almost insulted by their presence. "They are coming for you," he noted calmly. "They want to force me into a mate bond," she said, tears blurring her vision. The man's grip tightened slightly on her waist. "Is that so?" he asked. Suddenly, 3 of Baron's guards burst through the bushes. They stopped dead when they saw the man holding Elena. Their faces turned pale. Their weapons shook in their hands. The king," one guard stammered. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't just in the arms of a stranger. She was in the arms of Dominic, the Alpha King of all North America. "This girl is property of Baron Silas," the lead guard said, though his voice lacked conviction. Dominic looked at the guard as if he were an ant. "Property?" Dominic repeated the word slowly. He leaned down, his nose grazing Elena's neck. He took a deep breath, inhaling her scent. Elena felt a strange heat spreading from her neck to her toes. "She doesn't smell like Silas," Dominic said, his golden eyes glowing. He looked back at the guards. "She smells like strawberries and rain," he added. "And she smells like mine." The guards took a step back, their eyes wide with terror. "But the contract, the gold?" "Run back to your master," Dominic interrupted. "Tell him that what the king finds, the king keeps." The guards didn't wait for a second warning. They turned and fled into the darkness as if the devil himself were chasing them. Elena looked up at Dominic, her mind racing. She had escaped a monster, but had she run into a god? "You're the Alpha King," she whispered. "And you are Elena," he replied. She gasped. "How do you know my name?" Dominic traced a thumb over her lower lip. "I have known your name since the moment you were born," he said. "I have been waiting for you to run." Elena felt the world spinning. The bond she had felt for a second was now a roaring fire. She was exhausted, terrified, and strangely safe. "Why?" she asked. Dominic leaned in close, his lips brushing her ear. "Because a queen should never be sold," he whispered. "She should be claimed." Before she could speak, he swept her up into his arms. Elena rested her head against his shoulder. For the first time in her life, the forest didn't feel dark. The moon shone brightly above them, blessing the new union. The Alpha King began to walk deeper into the heart of the woods. Elena closed her eyes, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She was no longer a runaway. She was his. The forest was shrouded in a thick mantle of shadows and secrets. Dante walked with a lethal grace, moving soundlessly over the dry leaves. His arms held her firmly, yet without causing her any pain. Aliona rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. She was young and beautiful, with curves that had always attracted unwanted gazes. But in Dante's arms, her full figure felt perfectly protected and cherished. The dampness of the night permeated her torn wedding dress. They arrived at an immense cave, hidden behind a silent waterfall. Dante gently lowered her onto the solid stone floor. A campfire was already burning in the center, casting warm, dancing shadows upon the walls. The firelight finally illuminated the face of the Alpha King. He was not the hulking, lumbering giant described in the terrifying legends. Dante was athletic, pure lean muscle and contained power in every movement. He had short, dark hair, which accentuated his incredibly handsome, sharply defined features. His golden eyes met hers with an intensity that left her breathless. "You are safe here," he said, his deep voice echoing off the cave walls. Aliona shivered slightly, hugging herself. It was not from the cold of the night, but from the Alpha King's overwhelming, magnetic presence. She was resilient, she had survived years of cruelty within her former pack. She lifted her chin, refusing to cower before the most powerful male on the continent. "Why did you save me from the ceremony?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging within her. Dante took a step toward her, closing the distance with feline grace. "I did not save you out of pity, Aliona," he replied, speaking her name as if it were a sacred prayer. I did it because destiny hurled you directly against my chest. He raised his hand and gently grazed her dirt-stained cheek. His touch was surprisingly soft for such a lethal and feared warrior. No one will ever again put a price on your head or treat you like merchandise. No one will ever again force you to kneel before a false leader. Aliona felt a spark of liquid fire where his fingers touched her. The bond of fated mates throbbed between them, undeniable, raw, and wild. They will come looking for me, she whispered, the reality of her daring escape threatening to suffocate her. Dante let out a low growl that made the ground tremble beneath their feet. Let them try, Dante said, his eyes gleaming with a promise of absolute slaughter. I will tear apart anyone who tries to take you from my side. Aliona met his gaze, seeing the absolute truth reflected in his predatory stare. She felt her old, wretched life crumble into ash. He did not look at her as if she were property or a mere political trophy. He looked at her as if she were the absolute center of his universe. Aliona let her arms fall to her sides, accepting her astonishing new reality. She was no longer a frightened, runaway bride running for her life in the dark. She stood beside the High King, poised to become the undoing of those who had sold her. The red moon shone through the waterfall, sealing their pact of blood and destiny. Tomorrow, the world of wolves would tremble at the birth of their new queen. The first rays of dawn pierced through the veil of the hidden waterfall. Aliona slowly opened her eyes, feeling an unfamiliar, profound warmth surrounding her. She was wrapped in Dante's heavy black coat, breathing in his scent of pine and wild rain. For a fragile moment, she forgot the sheer terror of the mating ceremony. Then the dark memories of Baron Silas and her desperate escape flooded back into her mind. She sat up quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Dante was already awake, standing near the cave entrance with his broad back to her. The morning light highlighted his incredibly handsome, three-dimensional features as he turned around. His short, dark hair was slightly tousled by the cool morning breeze. He wasn't a bulky, monstrous brute like the horrifying legends had claimed. Instead, he possessed a lean, fiercely athletic strength that commanded absolute and immediate respect. You slept well, Dante said, his deep voice echoing softly off the cold stone walls. Aliona pulled the coat tighter around her curvy figure, feeling a sudden blush warm her cheeks. I haven't slept peacefully in years, she admitted, her voice carrying the weight of her past. Dante's molten golden eyes darkened instantly with a terrifying, protective fury. You will never lose another night of sleep out of fear, he promised, closing the distance between them. He walked toward her and offered a large, battle-calloused hand. It is time to take you home, Aliona. Home? She asked, her beautiful young face tilting up in genuine confusion. To the royal summit, he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. To my pack. Panic flared in her chest at the thought of facing an entire kingdom of elite strangers. She was just a runaway, a disposable political pawn who had ruined a blood treaty. They will see me as a weak fugitive, Aliona said, her naturally resilient spirit momentarily faltering. Dante stopped, his jaw clenching tightly as he knelt directly before her. He looked deeply into her eyes, refusing to let her break the intense connection. They will see you exactly as I do, he said, his voice a fierce, low rumble. They will see their undisputed queen. The journey to the royal summit was a breathtaking blur of incredible speed and raw power. Dante carried her through the ancient forests as if her plus-size figure weighed absolutely nothing. Aliona clung to his broad shoulders, feeling the vibrating, electric energy of the Alpha King. By midday, the dense trees parted to reveal a massive fortress carved into the side of a jagged mountain. This was the beating heart of the Alpha King's absolute domain. Hundreds of wolves, both in human and beast form, abruptly stopped their daily tasks. They gathered in the massive stone courtyard, their piercing eyes fixed entirely on their returning king. and on the mysterious woman held so protectively in his arms. Dante set Eliona down gently, keeping one possessive hand firmly resting on her lower back. The silence in the grand courtyard was absolute and utterly deafening. Eliona stood tall, refusing to shrink under the crushing weight of 1,000 judgmental stares. She bravely smoothed down the ruined remains of her torn, mud-stained wedding dress. She knew her soft curves stood out sharply among the battle-hardened, scarred female warriors of his pack. But she lifted her chin gracefully, channeling the deep resilience that had kept her alive all these years. An older woman with silver hair and a severely scarred face stepped forward from the silent crowd. "My king," the elder said, bowing her head slightly in a gesture of measured respect. "You have returned, but you bring a stranger from the lowly and deceitful Silas pack." The elder's sharp eyes swept over Eliona's dirt-stained dress and full figure with clear, biting judgment. "She smells of a broken mating ceremony and cowardice," the elder added, her tone icy. A low, earth-shaking growl violently ripped from Dante's chest. The sound was so primal and terrifying that several strong warriors took an involuntary step back in pure fear. "Watch your words, elder," Dante warned, his voice colder than the deepest winter ice. He pulled Eliona flush against his muscular side, his arm forming an unbreakable iron shield around her waist. "This woman is not a runaway, nor is she some broken political prize." Dante's golden eyes flared brilliantly with the ancient, unstoppable power of the royal bloodline. "She is Eliona, my fated mate." Loud gasps echoed sharply through the courtyard as the heavy weight of his declaration settled in. "She is the true and only queen of the royal summit. Anyone who looks at her with disrespect will lose their eyes today. Anyone who speaks ill of her will lose their tongue before nightfall." Dante looked fiercely around the courtyard, daring any single wolf to challenge his absolute decree. The elder immediately dropped to her knees, trembling as she exposed her neck in total submission. One by one, like a wave crashing upon the shore, every wolf in the courtyard followed suit. The most terrifying warriors in North America knelt in the dirt before a girl who had been sold for gold. Eliona felt a hot tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of sorrow or fear. It was the overwhelming, crashing realization that her desperate life of running was truly over. She wasn't just incredibly safe, she was unconditionally revered. But deep in the shadows of the dark woods they had left far behind, a black raven suddenly took flight. Baron Silas had finally found her lingering scent in the mud, and he was not a monster who accepted defeat. The brutal war for the queen had only just begun. The peace at the royal summit was shattered before the sun reached its peak. Dante was summoned abruptly to the war room by his top generals. Eliona watched him leave, already missing the immense warmth of his strong, athletic frame. He had kissed her forehead tenderly, his short, dark hair brushing against her soft skin. "Stay safely within the fortress walls," he had warned her, his handsome, three-dimensional face tense with worry. "Silas is testing our northern borders with raiding parties." Eliona walked slowly through the grand halls, feeling the crushing weight of the ancient stone architecture. The seasoned pack members bowed their heads as she passed, but she could physically feel their lingering, unspoken doubts. She was young, curvy, and undeniably beautiful, but she knew they wondered if she truly possessed the strength of a queen. Suddenly, the massive iron gates of the main courtyard groaned open with a deafening screech. A small, heavily armed delegation from Baron Silas's pack stepped into the fortress under a white flag of truce. The royal guards instantly drew their gleaming weapons, their sharp fangs bared in territorial aggression. Leading the unwelcome delegation was Silas's beater, a notoriously cruel man named Thorn. Thorn held a thick, rusted iron chain tightly in his scarred hand. At the end of the heavy chain was a young, violently trembling girl. Eliona's heart stopped dead in her chest. It was Maya, a little omega from her old village who used to secretly sneak her extra food when she was starving. "I bring an urgent message for the runaway bride," Thorn sneered, his mocking voice carrying across the tense courtyard. Alpha Baron Silas demands the immediate return of his rightful, purchased property. If she does not surrender herself by midnight, this useless child will pay the ultimate price. Thorn violently jerked the rusted chain, making young Maya stumble and cry out in sharp pain. The scarred elder who had challenged Eliona yesterday stepped forward, her eyes blazing with disgust. "We do not negotiate with treacherous filth like you," the elder spat venomously. "Then the girl dies right here, and the blood is entirely on your new queen's hands," Thorn laughed maliciously. Eliona felt a freezing, calculated rage rapidly replacing her initial panic. She vividly remembered the agonizing years of abuse, the suffocating feeling of being utterly powerless. She adamantly refused to let another innocent soul suffer a brutal fate because of her. She decisively pushed past the heavily armed royal guards, stepping directly into the path of Thorn. She stood impossibly tall, her beautiful plus-size figure casting a strong, unwavering shadow on the sunlit stones. "You are incredibly brave to walk into the Alpha King's absolute domain and threaten his fated mate," Eliona said smoothly. Her voice didn't shake, projecting a lethal calmness that surprised even herself. Thorn looked at her, fully expecting to see a terrified, weeping girl begging for mercy. Instead, he saw a fiercely resilient woman whose eyes burned with a dangerous, unyielding fire. "The king is hundreds of miles away at the border, distracted by our clever decoys," Thorn mocked arrogantly. "You are completely alone here, little trapped bird." "I am never alone in this kingdom," Eliona replied, taking another confident step closer to the cruel beater. "And I am absolutely no one's property to be bought or sold." She knew the intricate laws of the ancient wolf packs better than anyone standing in that courtyard. She had spent countless lonely nights reading the forbidden old texts while hiding from Silas's violent men. Under the ancient treaty of the Blood Moon, an envoy who brings a hostage forfeits his sacred right to safe passage, Eliona declared loudly and clearly. The surrounding royal guards murmured in sudden realization, knowing she was citing an undeniable, absolute truth. "You brought a weapon of coercion into a peaceful parley, Thorn, breaking the oldest law of our kind. By pack law, you are now a stripped prisoner of the royal summit, awaiting the king's judgment." Thorn's arrogant, mocking smile vanished instantly into a mask of pure fury. He recklessly dropped the rusted chain and aggressively reached for his jagged dagger. But Eliona didn't flinch, nor did she retreat a single inch. Before Thorn could fully draw his poisoned blade, Eliona snatched the heavy chain from the dusty ground. With a swift, violently practiced motion born from years of defending herself, she whipped the heavy iron links directly into Thorn's wrist. A sickening, loud crack echoed sharply through the previously silent courtyard. Thorn screamed in absolute agony, dropping his weapon as he fell heavily to his knees. The highly trained royal guards instantly swarmed the rest of the shocked delegation, pinning them brutally to the dirt. Eliona quickly knelt beside terrified Maya, desperately smashing the cruel collar around the young girl's neck with a heavy paving stone. She wrapped the sobbing child securely in her own arms, soothing her with soft, loving whispers. The entire fortress courtyard was staring at Eliona in complete, stunned silence. They had fully expected her to cower, to beg helplessly, or to wait for their king to save her. Instead, their young, curvy queen had brilliantly used their own sacred laws and her own raw courage to flawlessly defeat the enemy. The severely scarred elder stepped forward once again, but this time, her hard eyes held genuine, deep awe. "You know our sacred laws flawlessly, my queen," the elder whispered respectfully, bowing deeply. "I simply know how to survive in a world ruled by monsters," Eliona corrected her gently but firmly. Suddenly, a familiar, earth-shattering roar shook the very stone foundations of the ancient fortress. Dante burst through the massive gates like a dark hurricane, his molten golden eyes glowing with apocalyptic intent. He had brilliantly realized the border attack was a mere distraction and raced back at blinding speed for her. He saw Thorn bleeding pathetically on the ground and Aliona fiercely holding the rescued child. Dante's massive chest heaved as he took in the victorious scene, his sharp gaze locking instantly onto his mate. He didn't see a fragile damsel in distress who desperately needed his constant protection. He saw a fierce, beautiful queen who had already won her first major battle for their people. "It seems," Dante rumbled, a fiercely proud smirk touching his handsome, sculpted face, "I missed the main event." Aliona looked up at her breathtakingly handsome king and offered a radiant, confident smile. "I just saved you the trouble of dealing with a few trespassing prisoners," she replied smoothly. Dante walked over, his athletic, lean muscles shifting powerfully under his shirt, and pulled her and the child into his protective embrace. Silas had sent a deadly threat, but he had only succeeded in proving to the entire kingdom why Aliona was meant to rule. The devastating news of a full-scale war arrived just before the sun fully set over the majestic royal summit. Baron Silas, completely enraged and humiliated by his beater's public defeat, had officially declared a blood feud against the Alpha King. Silas was not foolish enough to march alone, having formed a desperate, treacherous alliance with a massive army of ruthless rogue wolves. The ancient, impenetrable fortress instantly buzzed with a tense, terrifying energy as the elite royal guards prepared for an all-out siege. Dante stood fiercely at the head of the massive war table, a brilliant tactical mind operating beneath his undeniably handsome, three-dimensional features. His short, dark hair was softly illuminated by the flickering candlelight of the grand, stone-walled strategy room. He commanded his fiercely loyal generals with the absolute authority and lean, athletic power of a true, undisputed sovereign. He was absolutely not the mindless, bulky monster of terrifying legends, but a lethal, calculating warrior king protecting his newfound family. Aliona adamantly refused to cower in the heavily guarded underground safe rooms as the deadly military preparations commenced. She intimately knew the horrifying reality of Silas's pack, and she knew exactly how brutally they fought to destroy everything. Her beautiful, curvy figure moved with urgent, confident purpose through the crowded, heavily fortified stone corridors of the fortress. She quickly gathered the female warriors, the young Omegas, and the seasoned elders who had bowed in absolute respect to her just yesterday. Using the extensive knowledge of wild herbs she had desperately learned while surviving in the cruel woods, she organized a massive triage center. Young Maya stayed constantly by her side, carrying clean bandages and fresh water with a fierce, unwavering dedication to her savior. The severely scarred elder woman watched their young queen work tirelessly, a profound, deep respect entirely replacing her previous hostility. Aliona was not just a fated mate to be fiercely protected behind tall stone walls, she was rapidly becoming the absolute heart of the royal summit. She utilized her deep resilience and quiet strength to bring order to the chaos, proving her worth without lifting a single blood-stained sword. As midnight rapidly approached, the heavy, rhythmic drums of Silas's approaching army echoed faintly from the dark, shadowy valley below. Dante finally found Aliona in the makeshift medical ward, his intensely glowing golden eyes instantly softening at the beautiful sight of her. He dismissed the heavily armed guards with a single, silent gesture of his battle-hardened, incredibly powerful hand. The mighty Alpha King walked over and gently pulled his exhausted, plus-size queen into the safe harbor of his muscular chest. "You should be resting, my beautiful queen," Dante whispered gently, his incredibly deep voice vibrating comfortingly against her soft skin. Aliona looked up into his strikingly handsome face, feeling the intense, magical pull of the ancient mate bond surging wildly between them. "A true queen absolutely does not sleep when her loyal family is preparing to bleed," she answered with quiet, unyielding resilience and grace. Dante smiled proudly, a rare and breathtakingly beautiful sight that made her racing heart flutter wildly in her chest. He gently cupped her soft, slightly dirt-smudged cheek, completely mesmerized by her radiant youth and undeniable inner strength. "Silas foolishly thinks he can take you back by threatening to burn my entire kingdom to ash," Dante said, his tone dropping to a dangerously low growl. He has severely underestimated the devastating, apocalyptic power of an alpha king defending his entire world. Aliona bravely reached up, her slightly trembling fingers tracing the sharp, absolutely perfect line of his aristocratic jaw. I am not afraid of that monster anymore, Dante, she confessed softly, her clear voice ringing with absolute, undeniable truth. Because I finally know that as long as I am with you, no cruel man can ever touch me or break me again. Dante leaned down slowly, pressing his warm lips passionately against hers in a fiery, breathtakingly desperate kiss. It was a deeply magical kiss that forever sealed their eternal bond, a silent vow sworn in the shadowy calm right before a brutal storm. The sacred, invisible string tying their wild souls together flared brilliantly, vividly illuminating their minds with overwhelmingly shared emotion. She deeply felt his immense, protective fury, his unwavering absolute loyalty, and his consuming, endless love for her. He profoundly felt her deep resilience, her endless compassion, and her fierce, beautifully unbreakable spirit shining in the darkness. The profound spiritual connection of the fated mates was finally complete, rendering them an unstoppable, flawlessly unified force of nature. A loud, piercing war horn suddenly shattered the intimate, heavy quiet of the dimly lit stone room. The ruthless enemy vanguard had officially breached the outer defensive perimeter of the dense northern woods. Dante slowly pulled back from her lips, his glowing golden eyes igniting instantly with the lethal, terrifying predatory fire of the dominant wolf. Stay exactly here, Aliona, he commanded her gently, but with the undeniable, absolute authority of a warlord marching to battle. I am going out there to personally bring you the severed head of the arrogant man who dared to put a price on your life. Aliona nodded bravely, squeezing his large, calloused hand one final, reassuring time before letting him go. Come back to me victorious and unharmed, my powerful king, she whispered fiercely into the tense, silent air. Dante turned flawlessly on his heel, his long dark coat billowing dramatically behind him like the sweeping wings of a dark angel. He marched confidently out of the stone room, leaving Aliona surrounded by the frantic, echoing sounds of impending, brutal combat. She stood incredibly tall among the worried pack members, a radiant, absolutely unwavering beacon of hope in their darkest, most terrifying hour. The very earth began to violently shake beneath their feet as thousands of massive, lethal wolves clashed violently in the valley below. The terrifying, blood-curdling screams of war violently ripped through the otherwise peaceful, star-filled night sky. Aliona tightly gripped the heavy edge of a wooden medical table, her knuckles turning completely white from the overwhelming tension. She closed her beautiful eyes and focused entirely on the steady, powerful heartbeat of her mate, echoing reassuringly through their newly forged magical bond. Baron Silas was about to learn a violently painful lesson about the devastating, fatal consequences of stealing from a true king. The massive, bloody battle for the royal summit, and for the absolute, unquestionable freedom of the new queen, had officially begun. The deafening roar of the distant battlefield echoed endlessly through the cold stone walls of the triage center. I hastily wiped the sweat from my forehead, my hands already stained with the blood of our wounded warriors. Every deeply ingrained instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly, fundamentally wrong with this night. The heavy iron doors of the medical ward suddenly exploded inward with a deafening, terrifying crash. I instinctively pushed young Maya firmly behind my curvy figure, aggressively shielding her from the flying stone debris. Through the thick, choking cloud of dust, a horrifyingly familiar figure confidently stepped into the flickering candlelight. It was Baron Silas, his yellow eyes burning with a deeply manic, obsessive, and cruel fury. He had cowardly bypassed the chaotic main front lines entirely, bringing his most elite rogue assassins directly to our unprotected rear. Did you honestly think a few stone walls could keep me from claiming what is rightfully mine? Silas sneered wickedly. His brutal, scarred mercenaries fanned out quickly across the dimly lit room, their sharp fangs bared at the helpless, injured pack members. Panic instantly erupted among the vulnerable elders, but I forcefully pushed down the paralyzing fear that violently threatened to choke me. I was absolutely no longer the fragile, starving, terrified girl he had casually bought with 3 mere bags of gold. I was the fiercely chosen queen of the royal summit, and I absolutely refused to let my innocent people be slaughtered. You do not own me, Silas, and you never truly did, I declared loudly, my voice ringing out with an unyielding, fierce resilience. I slowly backed toward the long wooden medical supply table, my fingers blindly and desperately searching for the small leather pouch I had prepared earlier. Silas laughed a cruel, hollow laugh, carelessly stepping over a wounded royal guard as he quickly closed the distance between us. Your new arrogant king is miles away, bleeding in the mud, while I finally take back my beautiful, runaway bride. He lunged forward with blinding, unnatural speed, his massive, clawed hand reaching aggressively and painfully for my throat. But I was already moving, deeply relying on my soft, plus-size body's surprising agility and my years of desperate, harsh survival. I ripped the tightly bound leather pouch open and violently hurled its entire contents directly into his feral, confident face. A massive, thick cloud of highly concentrated, toxic wolfsbane powder instantly filled the tense air squarely between us. Silas let out an agonizing, blood-curdling shriek as the potent herb violently burned his eyes and scarred his respiratory tract. He collapsed heavily to the hard stone floor, thrashing wildly and clawing desperately at his own burning face in pure, blinding agony. Kill them all and grab the girl. Silas screamed blindly to his rogue assassins, his voice severely distorted by excruciating pain. The remaining rogues charged forward viciously, but I quickly grabbed a heavy iron fire poker from the massive stone hearth. I stood firmly and immovably in front of the crying children, swinging the makeshift weapon with every ounce of my young, resilient strength. I was fiercely determined to die standing on my own 2 feet before ever surrendering to his cruelty again. Suddenly, the ambient temperature in the cavernous, chaotic room dropped instantly to a freezing, absolute zero. A suffocating, overwhelmingly apocalyptic aura flooded the medical ward, forcing the charging rogue wolves to freeze instantly in absolute, primal terror. A towering, majestic figure materialized seamlessly from the shadowy corridor, moving with the lethal, terrifying grace of a descending god. It was Dante. His short, dark hair was slightly matted with the blood of his fallen enemies, but his remarkably three-dimensional, handsome features were entirely composed. He absolutely did not look like a bulky, mindless, lumbering beast. He was pure, concentrated, athletic destruction elegantly wrapped in supreme royal authority. His brilliantly glowing golden eyes locked instantly onto the pathetic, writhing, screaming form of Baron Silas on the floor. You dared to enter her sacred sanctuary, Dante whispered dangerously, but his incredibly deep voice violently shook the very foundation of the ancient fortress. Silas desperately tried to crawl away backward, his previous immense arrogance entirely replaced by the sickening, pathetic stench of absolute cowardice. Before Silas could even open his bleeding mouth to beg for his miserable life, Dante moved faster than the human eye could physically process. The Supreme Alpha King firmly grabbed Silas by the scruff of his neck, effortlessly lifting the heavily built man into the air with just one hand. This is the undeniable, eternal price of ever touching my queen, Dante declared with chilling, absolute, and terrifying finality. With a remarkably swift, brutally efficient twist of his highly powerful, lean muscles, Dante violently snapped Silas's neck. The sickening, loud crunch echoed sharply in the suddenly silent room, and the cruel tyrant's lifeless body was casually discarded onto the cold stones like common trash. The remaining heavily armed rogue assassins immediately dropped their crude weapons, falling forcefully to their knees in absolute, trembling submission. They instantly realized they were not facing a mere angry wolf, they were looking directly at the undisputed, unstoppable god of the North American Pax. Dante ignored the cowering, pathetic mercenaries entirely, his fiercely glowing golden eyes searching frantically through the smoky, blood-stained room. The terrifying, murderous, dark aura completely vanished the exact miraculous second his intense, beautiful gaze finally found me. He crossed the blood-stained stone floor in 3 incredibly long strides, pulling my trembling, exhausted body fiercely against his strong, solid chest. I buried my tear-stained face deep in the warm crook of his neck, breathing in his wonderfully familiar, deeply comforting scent of rain and glorious battle. "I have you now, Aliona," he murmured deeply and reassuringly into my ear, his large, capable hand gently and rhythmically stroking my back. "You are entirely safe in my arms, and that monster will never, ever haunt your beautiful dreams again." I wrapped my arms incredibly tightly around his perfectly athletic waist, deeply listening to the powerful, steady, calming drumming of his heroic heart. Tears of sheer, overwhelming relief streamed quietly down my soft cheeks, finally washing away the last lingering, toxic remnants of my tragic, painful past. We stood powerfully united among the absolute, bloody chaos of the ward, our deeply forged, magical mate bond humming intensely with victorious, unbreakable energy. The elders tightly gathered around us began to chant a soft, beautiful prayer of deep gratitude, their voices trembling with profound, genuine reverence. They looked up at Dante with absolute, expected awe, but they looked at me with an entirely new, deeply unshakable, and earned respect. I had not cowardly hidden away in the dark, and I had bravely protected the most incredibly vulnerable members of his powerful, ancient pack. Dante pulled back just enough to look deeply and passionately into my eyes, his rough thumbs gently and lovingly wiping away my falling tears. His incredibly handsome, sculpted face softened magically into a breathtaking look of pure, unadulterated adoration that was fiercely meant only for me. "You fought exactly like a true, magnificent warrior tonight, my beautiful, perfect mate," he praised softly, his rich voice full of immense, swelling pride. I smiled radiantly up at him, profoundly feeling the deep, undeniable, and beautiful truth of his empowering words resonating within my very soul. I was Aliona, a fierce survivor of extreme cruelty, a bold master of my own destiny, and the fiercely beloved, curvy queen of the North. The great, bloody war was officially and permanently won, and the heavy, suffocating shadows of my painful history were finally banished by the breaking dawn. Together, my majestic King Dante and I would beautifully build a glorious new era for our loyal people, a legendary kingdom firmly founded on true strength and unwavering love. The heavy metallic scent of blood slowly faded from the stone halls of the royal summit. Baron Silas was dead, his tyrannical reign permanently erased by Dante's absolute power. I stood beside my majestic king on the grand balcony, looking out over the recovering valley. The morning sun cast a warm, golden glow over the massive, ancient fortress. Dante wrapped his strong, lean arms around my curvy waist securely from behind. He rested his chin gently on my shoulder, his short, dark hair brushing softly against my neck. "The rogue armies have completely surrendered or scattered into the harsh northern winds," he murmured. His incredibly handsome, three-dimensional face was truly relaxed for the first time since I met him. He was no longer a terrifying warlord preparing for a brutal siege, he was simply my devoted mate. I leaned back into his solid, athletic chest, feeling a profound, deeply earned sense of peace. "Our people are finally safe, Dante," I whispered, resting my hand over his large, battle-scarred one. "But in a brutal world ruled by ancient wolves, absolute peace is always a fragile, fleeting illusion." A loud, echoing blast from the ceremonial ivory horns suddenly shattered the quiet morning. Dante's athletic body immediately tensed, his glowing golden eyes narrowing into dangerous, predatory slits. "The High Council of Elders," he growled, a deep, vibrating sound of pure, unadulterated annoyance. "They are the ancient lawkeepers of all North American packs, and they never come uninvited." I turned to face him, instinctively drawing on the deep resilience that had kept me alive for so long. "They are here for me, aren't they?" I asked, my voice remaining perfectly steady despite my racing heart. Dante gently cupped my face, his thumb tracing my jawline with fierce, unwavering protective devotion. "They cannot touch you, Aliona," he promised, his tone vibrating with lethal, absolute royal authority. "You are my fated mate and the undisputed queen of this powerful kingdom." We walked down to the main courtyard together, hand in hand, facing the approaching new threat. 3 elderly wolves draped in heavy crimson cloaks stood proudly in the center of the square. They possessed an ancient, highly intimidating aura that demanded absolute, unquestioning respect from everyone. The entire pack gathered around in silent reverence, intensely watching the tense confrontation unfold. The lead counselor, an arrogant man with piercing silver eyes, struck his wooden staff against the stones. "Alpha King Dante," the counselor announced, his cold voice carrying the heavy weight of centuries of tradition. "You have claimed a lowly runaway bride as your true queen, shedding royal blood to defend her." Dante stepped forward, his lean, muscular frame radiating an overwhelming, suffocating alpha dominance. "I killed a pathetic tyrant to protect my chosen fated mate," Dante corrected him sharply and violently. "Aliona is your true queen, and I will execute anyone who actively questions her rightful place here." The lead counselor did not flinch, completely unfazed by the king's terrifying, explicitly murderous threat. A fated mate is naturally chosen by the goddess, but a reigning queen must be chosen by the ancestors. He pointed a long, bony finger directly at my beautiful, generously plus-size figure. "She possesses a soft, untested body and carries the dark, shameful stench of a broken mating ceremony. If she is to rule the north, she must survive the ancient, grueling trial of the silver moon." A shocked, genuinely horrified gasp collectively rippled through our fiercely loyal pack members. I felt Dante's devastating, world-ending fury violently erupt through our deeply connected magical bond. "Absolutely not," Dante roared, his sharp fangs fully descending as his eyes burned like twin suns. "No living queen has been subjected to that barbaric, fatal trial in over 200 years. It is a brutal, agonizing test of the mind and spirit that permanently destroys the weak. I will slaughter the entire council before I let you throw my wife into the ancestral caverns." The royal guards instantly drew their gleaming steel blades, ready to massacre the council on his absolute command. A bloody, catastrophic civil war was about to ignite right in the middle of our slowly recovering home. I could not let Dante blindly destroy the sacred, historical foundation of his kingdom just to protect me. I gently placed my hand firmly on his tense, muscular chest, urging him to look down directly at me. "Dante, stop," I said quietly, but my clear voice carried a strange, commanding power that immediately silenced the courtyard. He looked at me, his striking, incredibly handsome face twisted in absolute, highly protective agony. "Aliona, you have no idea what they are actually asking of you," he pleaded softly, meant just for my ears. "The cavern forcefully makes you relive your darkest traumas. It brutally breaks the soul from the inside out." I smiled bravely at him, my deeply resilient spirit flaring far brighter than any ancient, forgotten magic. "I have painfully lived in a waking nightmare for years, Dante," I reminded him with absolute, unwavering certainty. "I successfully survived starvation, abuse, and the terrifying, relentless cruelty of Baron Silas all on my own. A dark, magical cave absolutely cannot break a determined woman who has already crawled her way out of hell." I gracefully turned away from my fiercely protective king and boldly faced the arrogant, heavily judgmental counselors. I stood incredibly tall, immensely proud of my young, curvy body and the massive strength hidden deeply within it. "I unconditionally accept your ancient challenge," I declared, my voice echoing loudly and confidently off the high stone walls. "I will enter the ancestral caverns tonight at the absolute peak of the glowing silver moon." The lead counselor bowed his head slightly, a dark, highly calculating smirk hiding safely beneath his crimson hood. "If you fail, Aliona, You will desperately wander the cavern's shadows forever as a lost, permanently broken spirit. But if you survive until the dawn, the ancient ancestors will grant you the eternal, undisputed crown of the North. Dante pulled me roughly and possessively against his side, his strong heart hammering wildly against my own. You do not have to arbitrarily prove anything to these ancient, misguided fools, he whispered desperately into my hair. I have to fully prove it to myself, I answered truthfully, looking up into his beautifully terrified, glowing eyes. I absolutely need to know that I am truly strong enough to stand equally beside the most powerful king in the world. As the fading sun slowly sank behind the jagged mountain peaks, the heavy, sealed stone doors of the caverns were opened. A freezing, highly unnatural wind violently rushed out from the pitch-black, horrifying depths of the mountain. I kissed Dante one final, deeply passionate time, eagerly drawing on his immense, fiercely unwavering love. Without looking back even once, I bravely stepped forward into the suffocating, magical darkness of the ultimate trial. The massive stone doors slammed shut heavily behind me with a terrifying, absolute, and echoing finality. I was completely alone in the endless dark, perfectly ready to permanently defeat the ghosts of my past. The heavy stone doors sealed tightly shut behind me, plunging me into an absolutely suffocating, ancient magical darkness. The air inside the ancestral caverns was freezing cold, carrying the heavy, haunting scent of damp earth and forgotten bones. I took a slow, deep breath, firmly grounding my young, curvy body against the terrifying, overwhelming silence of the mountain. Suddenly, the absolute darkness began to violently warp and shift around me, rapidly taking the horrifying shape of my deepest nightmares. The cold stone walls violently dissolved, maliciously replaced by the filthy, starving village of my painful, abusive youth. I vividly heard the cruel, mocking laughter of the very people who had ruthlessly sold me for mere bags of gold. A massive, shadowy figure materialized directly in front of me, bearing the terrifying, heavily scarred face of Baron Silas. You are absolutely nothing but a cheap, disposable object, Aliona, the terrifying phantom of Silas hissed venomously into the dark. Look at your soft, plus-size body, you are completely unworthy of a true, powerful king's love or respect. The brutal illusion forcefully struck me, sending a sharp, horrifyingly realistic jolt of pain through my deeply resilient mind. I stumbled backward onto the cold cavern floor, desperately fighting the overwhelming, toxic wave of deeply ingrained panic. The ancient magic was violently ripping open my oldest, most guarded mental scars, desperately trying to bleed my spirit completely dry. Countless shadowy claws aggressively reached out from the terrifying darkness, violently pulling at my torn clothes and my hair. You are a coward, a pathetic runaway bride who brings absolutely nothing but war and tragic death, the cavern's voices chanted relentlessly. The oppressive, magical weight of my traumatic past pressed down heavily on my chest, brutally attempting to shatter my soul. For one terrifying, agonizing second, I genuinely felt myself slipping back into the helpless, broken girl I used to fiercely despise. But then, a brilliant, powerful flash of molten gold instantly pierced the suffocating, toxic darkness of my tortured mind. I desperately remembered Dante, my fiercely devoted mate, waiting agonizingly for me just outside these cursed, ancient stone walls. I vividly pictured his highly athletic, lean physique, heavily contrasting with the bulky, monstrous brutes who had always ruthlessly tormented me. I perfectly recalled his handsome, three-dimensional features and the incredibly striking way his dark, short hair blew in the mountain wind. Most importantly, I remembered the absolute, unwavering reverence and deep, genuine respect blazing eternally in his beautiful, predatory eyes. He absolutely did not see a broken, disposable victim. He saw a fierce, highly capable, and magnificent Queen of the North. I slowly planted my hands firmly on the freezing stone floor, absolutely refusing to let the illusions force me to my knees ever again. I relentlessly pushed myself back up, standing incredibly tall and immensely proud of my soft, beautifully resilient, and capable form. I am absolutely not the helpless, frightened girl you completely destroyed, I screamed defiantly into the swirling, magical void. I effortlessly survived your cruel starvation, I violently defeated your top assassins, and I bravely saved the innocent with my own hands. A fierce, blindingly bright aura of pure, unadulterated willpower violently erupted from the very core of my tested soul. I am Eliona, the fiercely chosen, eternally fated mate of the absolute most powerful Alpha King in North America. My absolutely unwavering declaration hit the terrifying shadows like a devastating, apocalyptic wave of pure, searing, divine light. The horrific illusion of Baron Silas screamed in absolute agony as it violently shattered into a million harmless, glowing, golden fragments. The oppressive, toxic voices instantly faded away, rapidly replaced by a deeply profound, highly respectful, and ancient silence. A warm, gentle silver light softly illuminated the cavern, signifying the ancient ancestors' absolute, undeniable, and permanent approval. I had successfully faced the darkest, most terrifying demons of my past and completely annihilated them with my own inner, unyielding strength. I peacefully walked through the remaining, empty tunnels, my heart beating with a glorious, truly unconquerable, and victorious rhythm. As I finally reached the massive exit, the heavy stone doors began to slowly grind open, brilliantly revealing the breaking dawn. The brilliant, warming rays of the morning sun flawlessly washed over my exhausted, entirely victorious, and beautiful figure. The entire royal summit was gathered outside in the massive courtyard, their faces pale with the grueling night of intense, agonizing worry. Dante stood at the very front of the crowd, his athletic, powerfully built body trembling slightly with a terrifying, fiercely contained desperation. When his glowing golden eyes finally locked onto my completely unharmed, radiantly smiling face, he let out a choked, intensely emotional gasp. The arrogant high counselors instantly fell forcefully to their knees in the dirt, absolutely stunned and humbled by my impossible, glorious survival. Dante fiercely crossed the courtyard in an absolute blur of supreme, athletic speed, aggressively sweeping me up into his strong, protective arms. He buried his incredibly handsome face deeply into my neck, his short hair brushing my skin as he breathed me in like life-saving oxygen. "You did it, my incredibly brave, brilliantly unstoppable queen," he whispered reverently, his exceptionally deep voice thick with overwhelming emotion. I wrapped my arms securely around his broad, muscular shoulders, knowing with absolute, undeniable certainty that I truly belonged here. The morning sun bathed the ancient, blood-stained stones of the royal summit in a warm, profoundly triumphant golden light. I stood firmly in the center of the grand courtyard, my breathing perfectly steady and my young spirit completely unbroken. Dante's incredibly strong, lean arms were wrapped securely around my curvy waist, anchoring me to the beautiful reality of my survival. His short, dark hair brushed softly against my temple as he pressed a deep, fiercely protective kiss to the side of my head. The arrogant high counselors, who had callously condemned me to the darkness just hours ago, were now trembling on their knees in the dirt. They pressed their foreheads entirely to the cold stone floor, thoroughly humbled by the ancient, undeniable magic that now radiated from my very soul. I looked down at the lead counselor, feeling absolutely no lingering anger, only the calm, unshakable certainty of a true ruler. "You may rise, elders," I commanded softly, yet my clear voice echoed with a strange, compelling power that demanded absolute obedience. The lead counselor slowly lifted his head, his previously piercing silver eyes now filled with nothing but genuine, profound reverence. "Forgive our profound ignorance, my queen," he rasped, his voice trembling under the heavy weight of centuries of shattered traditions. "The ancestors have spoken with absolute clarity, and the entire North American continent now bows to your undeniable, majestic strength." Dante's chest rumbled with a deep, immensely proud growl that vibrated wonderfully through my own body via our magical mate bond. He didn't wait for another word from the council, he effortlessly swept me up into his powerful, heavily muscled arms. He carried me through the massive, cheering crowds of our fiercely loyal pack members, completely ignoring traditional royal decorum. His remarkably handsome, three-dimensional face was set in an expression of pure, unadulterated devotion that made my heart flutter wildly. He wasn't a lumbering, bulky monster showcasing his prize. He was a flawlessly athletic, lethal king fiercely protecting his absolute world. We bypassed the grand halls entirely, ascending the wide stone spiral staircase directly to the heavily guarded royal chambers. The massive oak doors slammed shut behind us, finally sealing out the overwhelming, joyous noise of the celebrating fortress. Dante gently set me down on the edge of the massive, plush velvet bed, kneeling carefully onto the floor right in front of me. His glowing golden eyes eagerly searched every single inch of my beautiful, exhausted face, desperately looking for any hidden, lingering pain. "Did the cavern hurt you, Aliona?" he whispered hoarsely, his large, battle-calloused hands gently trembling as they cradled my face. I smiled radiantly, reaching out to gently trace the sharp, perfectly sculpted line of his aristocratic, undeniably handsome jaw. "It violently tried to break me with the painful ghosts of my past, Dante," I confessed honestly, my voice barely above a quiet whisper. "It desperately showed me the cruel starvation, the terrifying abuse, and the horrific phantom of Baron Silas laughing at my misery." Dante's athletic frame instantly went completely rigid, his fiercely protective instincts flaring dangerously at the mere mention of that monster's name. "But I didn't let those dark shadows win," I quickly reassured him, leaning forward to press my forehead lovingly against his. "I brilliantly remembered the absolute, unwavering respect in your eyes, and I fiercely remembered that I am a survivor, not a victim." Dante let out a shaky, profoundly relieved breath, slowly burying his face deep into the soft curve of my neck. "You are the strongest, most incredibly magnificent creature I have ever known," he murmured against my warm skin, his voice thick with overwhelming emotion. "I spent my entire, bloody life ruthlessly conquering armies, but you effortlessly conquered my wild soul without lifting a single sword." He spent the next few hours treating me with a level of tender, absolute worship that completely melted away my remaining exhaustion. He personally drew a steaming hot bath, infusing the water with soothing, wild mountain herbs and deeply fragrant rose petals. He gently washed the dirt and dried blood from my soft, plus-size body, treating every single curve with intense, breathtaking reverence. He never once looked at my full figure with the disgust or mockery I had tragically endured in my abusive former pack. Instead, his golden eyes burned with a fiery, consuming adoration, constantly whispering how absolutely beautiful and completely perfect I was. When we finally emerged from the bath, wrapped in thick, luxurious silk robes, the afternoon sun was already beginning to set. A soft, respectful knock at the chamber door announced the arrival of the head royal seamstress and a highly excited little Maya. Maya sprinted across the massive room, throwing her tiny arms fiercely around my waist with a bright, tearful smile of pure joy. "I knew you were brave enough to beat the scary cave, Queen Aliona," the little girl cheered, her eyes shining with absolute hero worship. I knelt down slightly, pulling the precious child into a warm, deeply comforting hug, silently vowing that she would never know hunger or fear again. The royal seamstress then proudly presented the magnificent, breathtaking gown that had been entirely custom-made for my official coronation. It was absolutely not the fragile, innocent, easily torn white lace of the tragic, forced mating ceremony I had desperately fled from. It was a deeply rich, powerful crimson silk, heavily embroidered with intricate, shining gold threads that perfectly depicted howling wolves and ancient moons. The clever cut of the magnificent dress was expertly designed to flawlessly accentuate my generous curves, proudly celebrating my beautifully feminine shape. I slipped into the heavy, luxurious gown, instantly feeling the transformative, empowering weight of my newly accepted royal destiny. My long, dark hair was elegantly styled, woven through with tiny, sparkling diamonds that caught the light like captured, distant stars. When I finally turned around to face Dante, the breath completely left his lungs in a sharp, incredibly audible, and highly satisfying gasp. He had changed into his formal royal attire, a tailored, pitch-black military tunic that perfectly highlighted his lean, purely athletic build. His dark, short hair was neatly styled, making his striking, dangerously handsome features look even more undeniably regal and devastatingly attractive. He slowly walked toward me, his golden eyes completely dark with intense, overwhelming desire and profound, unshakable respect. "You look exactly like a conquering goddess, my beautifully resilient queen," he declared passionately, offering me his strong, steady arm. "Then let us go and formally claim our hard-won kingdom, my handsome king," I replied confidently, proudly placing my hand firmly on his arm. The heavy wooden doors of the grand balcony groaned open, instantly revealing the truly staggering, breathtaking scale of our gathered empire. Tens of thousands of elite wolves from every single allied pack across the entire continent filled the massive valley completely. A deafening, earth-shattering roar of absolute, unyielding approval erupted from the massive crowd the very second we stepped into the moonlight. The deep, rhythmic pounding of their spears against their heavy shields echoed violently through the jagged mountains like thunder. Dante confidently led me to the very edge of the grand balcony, raising his hand in a simple, sharp gesture that commanded absolute, instant silence. The massive, endless sea of powerful warriors immediately fell completely quiet, intensely hanging on their supreme alphas every single breath. My loyal brothers and fierce sisters, Dante's incredibly deep, magically amplified voice rolled smoothly over the quiet, vast valley. For generations, we have ruthlessly fought for territory, brutally bled for dominance, and foolishly believed that pure violence was our only true strength. He gently turned toward me, taking both of my trembling hands firmly in his large, incredibly warm ones. But true strength is not merely found in the terrifying ability to destroy your enemies or tear flesh from bone. True strength is the profound, beautiful resilience to survive absolute hell and still possess the incredible grace to show endless compassion. Dante proudly gestured to me, his glowing eyes shining with an immense, deeply overwhelming pride that made my heart physically ache with joy. "Behold Eleonora, a woman who bravely escaped a tyrant's cruel chains, flawlessly outsmarted a highly trained assassin, and utterly conquered the darkest ancestral magic. She is absolutely not just my fated, chosen mate, she is the fiercely beating, profoundly compassionate heart of this entire, massive kingdom." The lead counselor slowly stepped forward from the shadows, carrying a magnificent, deeply ancient cushion made of black velvet. Resting flawlessly on the velvet was the legendary, heavily jeweled crown of the silver moon, a stunning artifact that had not been worn in centuries. Dante carefully lifted the incredibly heavy, sparkling silver crown with both of his strong hands, turning back to face me entirely. I slowly and gracefully bowed my head, feeling the cool, surprisingly comforting weight of the ancient silver settling perfectly into my hair. "I officially crown you Eleonora, the undisputed, fiercely beloved, and eternally reigning Queen of the North," Dante declared with absolute, thrilling finality. He leaned down and pressed a deep, branding, and breathtakingly passionate kiss directly to my lips, entirely ignoring the watching thousands. The profound, intense heat of our magical mate bond flared brilliantly, visibly washing over the entire fortress in a wave of comforting, protective energy. When we finally broke the kiss, the entire, massive valley erupted into a wildly chaotic, incredibly beautiful symphony of triumphant, echoing howls. Every single wolf, from the most heavily scarred veteran warrior to the youngest, smallest pup, tilted their heads back and sang to the glowing moon. They were fiercely howling for their victorious king, but more importantly, they were howling in genuine, absolute adoration for their new queen. The grand coronation feast that immediately followed was a glorious, brilliantly vibrant blur of joyous music, endless laughter, and rich, delicious food. I sat proudly on the massive, carved throne right beside Dante, entirely relaxed and flawlessly comfortable in my new, immensely powerful role. Pack members nervously but eagerly approached the high table all night, offering deeply respectful gifts and swearing their eternal, unwavering loyalty. I smiled warmly and spoke kindly to every single one of them, fiercely ensuring that no one ever felt invisible or terrified in my presence. I watched happily as little Maya ran safely through the grand hall, her hands completely full of sweet pastries, laughing without a single care in the world. The heavy, suffocating nightmares of my agonizing past were finally, permanently gone, entirely replaced by this beautiful, brilliantly bright reality. Hours later, when the massive, wild celebration had finally begun to peacefully quiet down, Dante gently pulled me away from the grand hall. We walked quietly together to the secluded, highest balcony of the fortress, intimately bathed in the soft, pure light of the full silver moon. The cool mountain breeze gently rustled Dante's short hair, and I contentedly wrapped my arms tightly around his perfectly athletic, incredibly solid waist. He immediately pulled me deeply against his chest, securely resting his chin perfectly on the top of my beautifully crowned head. "Are you finally completely happy, my beautiful, brilliant Eliona?" he asked softly, his deep voice heavily laced with overwhelming, pure love. I looked out over the vast, peaceful, and fiercely protected territory that we now completely ruled perfectly together. I thought about the terrified, desperate, starving girl who had wildly torn her white lace dress to blindly run into the terrifying, dark woods. That fragile, deeply broken girl was entirely gone now, permanently replaced by a resilient, deeply loved, and fiercely powerful woman. "I am profoundly, absolutely, and wonderfully happy, Dante," I whispered truthfully, pressing a soft kiss to his beating heart. I had frantically run away from a horrific, forced destiny, only to beautifully sprint directly into the arms of my truest, most magnificent salvation. The Alpha King had fiercely claimed my runaway heart, and in absolutely every single way that truly mattered, I had gloriously claimed his right back.